Wonderful. Well, thank you for those of you that have joined either live with us today or if you're watching this recording. So my name is Alexandra. I am the Chief of Research and Development for InMind Services, and we're working with the Nebraska Department of Education to provide some of these sessions this year. If you have any questions, my contact information will be at the end, so feel free to reach out directly to me if you have any questions about anything that I say here tonight. So in my background within education, which is part of what we do at InMind, my background in education, I taught for several years, mostly in the city of Philadelphia and mostly middle and high school, though I do have like a little bit of pre-K experience in there as well. And then personally, I am the mother of 4 children between ages 1 and 8. And I feel like I always like to mention those two things because for me, those two things are very, very much related. My work is when I was teaching was very much enlightening to the work that to what I was doing when I came home, and I kept seeing kind of connections between the two. And so when we started InMind, part of what we were trying to do is we were trying to bridge that gap a little bit between what was happening at home and what was happening at school, and we wanted to make sure that there was consistency between the two, and that the supports that we were providing for schools and the information that we were providing to schools, that we would also provide similar information to parents and to families, and really to all of those that are in the lives of children and all of those that are working with children. And so I'm really excited to provide this session, which is sort of the counterpart to the session that I provided recently for educators within the state of Nebraska. And it's all about, how we're thinking about children's behavior, especially our own children. And so sometimes I might interchangeably use the term student and child because I'm so used to saying student. And sometimes, I'm so used to kind of intermingling my identity as a parent versus my identity as an educator. So if I mix up those two terms, I do really apologize for that. And again, if you hear, I hear my youngest crying right now because I think my husband is trying to change him at the moment. But I do apologize if you hear any of my kids who are all in the home, but occupied at the moment. So our objectives for the session tonight are first to discuss the importance of picking our battles with our children, which is something I learn every single day as a parent, and something that was a really, really, a changing point for me when I was a teacher as well. We want to look at how we define defiance, disrespect, aggression, these words that we typically use when we're describing student behavior. We want to identify effective ways to teach children how to express the needs that are underlying their behavior, whether it be defiance or disrespect or aggression, that we're giving them the skills they need to communicate in an appropriate way about the need that is underlying that. And then lastly, we'll discuss and review some strategies that work in helping us really be equipped to respond to things like defiance and aggression and disrespect. So imagine that you are a parent of 3 kids, and you're driving your kids home from school. One of your kids begins to tap the window repeatedly in the back. So we have the minivan, and so there are seats that are directly behind me, and then there are a row of seats behind that. And my oldest, who sits in the very back, loves to do this. He taps repeatedly on the window with whatever it is that he entered the car with, whether it be, a pencil that he has, or sometimes it's like a fidget. They have, a box of things that they can pull out and use if we're driving. And again, there are like some fidgets in there, some colored pencils. So whatever it is, sometimes he grabs those things and he might tap the window. He might tap the cup holder next to him. He might tap his own booster seat. But the other kids in this situation, you're in the scenario, the other kids don't notice. The other 2 kids do not seem bothered by this. In a different scenario, so later that evening, your middle child begins to make faces at the youngest. And so the youngest gets very upset and starts screaming at their sister. He starts saying, she's bothering me. And he's just getting more and more escalated. And she keeps kind of making faces at him. So these are 2 situations that if you've been a parent, you've probably been in a situation exactly like this, or you've been in a situation very, very similar to one or both of these. I can't tell you the amount of times that I have been in either of these situations. And I think of these two things as being fundamentally different. And the reason I think of them as being different is because this is really a lesson in like how important it is to pick my battles as a parent. And the first scenario, it might be slightly annoying to you. So you might be driving, you might be like, I'm trying to listen to something on the radio. I'm trying to, make sure I'm paying attention to directions. I might just be agitated because I don't like driving, whatever the scenario is. That sound of the kid tapping on the window might be a little bit annoying to you. However, it doesn't seem to be that upsetting to the majority of people in the car. It might be important, if you are able to in that moment, not to fight that battle, not to say, hey, I need you to stop tapping, to engage in kind of that back and forth that may happen around that behavior. And that kid very well could be tapping because they're a bit dysregulated at the moment, or because they, had a tough day at school, or, one of a variety of things could have happened. In that situation, I'd say it's probably not the best to fight that battle if it's something you can manage. In the second situation, however, where your middle child makes faces, it clearly agitates the youngest gets upset, they start screaming. Again, whether or not this is appropriate behavior, if you're a parent, you know that these things happen. These things happen very, very often. And so in that situation, I would say you can't just walk away and say, I'm going to pick my battles. This is not something I'm going to deal with. In that situation, you probably do want to address it. And that's because there are multiple kids involved in it. It's clearly something where the youngest is feeling frustrated or upset or disrespected. And then in response, he turns and does something to his sibling where he's screaming, or, he's getting upset, he's getting escalated in that moment. And then you have two kids that are kind of having these behaviors that are less than ideal. I would say that's a situation where you say, I'm going to pick my battles, and this is one that I'm going to pick because clearly it's one that is like, escalating, and their behaviors that I really want to address. And so sometimes when, I'm thinking to myself, is this something, that I want to address in this moment, or is it not something? And these are questions. If I'm thinking, am I going to ask my child in this moment to stop the behavior? If I want them to stop a behavior, there's three things I usually can pause and ask myself about, like, if I want to fight that battle. Number one, is this behavior, this activity, this thing that my child is engaging in the moment, is it impeding the child's learning, their development, or the comfort of others in the family? And you are included in that. So one caveat I have to the example that I just provided was, if you are driving and that tapping in the back is so distracting to you that you are not able to focus on what you're doing in the moment, you can stop that behavior. You can say, hey, I'm trying to drive right now. I feel like it would be a lot safer if you weren't tapping. Could you do something else? Could you fidget, silently? Could you talk to me about something else? Could you just stop that tapping? So there are situations where, like, you are also, the person that is feeling uncomfortable, the first person that is, disturbed by that behavior. And there's a way to address that in that moment, to say, like, hey, I need you to actually stop tapping on the window because, I'm feeling really uncomfortable in this situation and I can't focus on what I'm doing at the moment. Even though I know that thing that you're doing isn't really bothering or upsetting anybody else. But if you're like, I could probably manage that, I'm just going to bring them home. We're 5 minutes from home or 10 minutes from home right now. And maybe that thing is comforting to my kid. Tapping on the window is comforting to them. Then that, again, might not be a battle you want to pick. Is it against a family value, norm, or expectation? And so a lot of times we as people are really just conditioned by our own upbringing to stop things that were stopped for us. And so if you as a child were told, it is disrespectful to get up from the dinner table. And this is actually an example from my own, upbringing. When I wanted to get up from the dinner table, I needed to say, may I please be excused? And if I didn't ask, may I please be excused, and I just got up and walked away, or I just got up and cleared my plate, that would have been seen as disrespectful in the home that I was raised in. Now, whether or not that's disrespectful is neither here nor there. However, is it the value, the norm, or the expectation in your family? And so thinking about, like, do I want my child to ask, may I be excused when I get up from the dinner table? does that meet the values that me, my partner, that we have decided, these are the expectations that we want to have for our family. This is the value that we're holding. This is what it means to be respectful for us. And we have communicated that to our children. And is that like an age appropriate expectation for that child? And so a lot of times when we think about those things that maybe like, were expectations for us, maybe they don't match with our values anymore. Maybe they don't match with our partner's values because they were raised differently. And so it's really a matter of like deciding internally in your family, what are our values? What are our norms? What are our expectations in our family? And is this thing that I want my kid to stop doing in the moment against a family value, norm, expectation that has been communicated or that we want to communicate? Or is it just something I'm used to saying no to or expecting because it was something that was expected of me? And lastly, the third question that I would ask if you're looking to stop a behavior that your kid is showing in the moment, is it a safety issue for anyone in the family? So in that last example I provided where one child makes a face at the other one and the other one gets mad and starts yelling, probably not a safety issue, but let's say, it were to continue to escalate, I could see it becoming a safety issue if one of them started to get so upset that they got physical with the other one. Now, again, that likely wouldn't happen in most settings, but as a person in your family, know what things are going to trigger different members of your family. And so as an example of something that could be like a safety issue, if we have, if we have this like climbing triangle in our basement. And so if one of our kids decides, I'm going to climb on top of the triangle and I'm going to just jump off the top of the triangle, that might be a safety issue, depending on the age of the kid. Like if that is going to cause them physical harm. So I might just pick up my kid in the moment and pull him off of the climbing triangle because that behavior in that moment is a safety issue. That is a battle that I do want to pick because it's safety related. And that's why, and I sort of touched on this a little bit, but it's really, really important to think of like, again, what are your clear family values and expectations? And I say it's really, really important to be clear because you want to leave as little room as possible for misinterpretation. If I say to somebody, especially somebody, even if I say to my husband sometimes, what does it mean to be respectful? What it means to me and what it means to my husband might be very different just based on the fact we were raised in different homes. We've had different experiences. We might have different cultural upbringings. We had different religions. So whatever that might be, you want to make sure that communication to your children is consistent. So what does it mean to be respectful? Because if a child, I remember saying to my 8-year-old a few months ago, I said, when you roll your eyes, it feels really disrespectful to me. And he hadn't even realized he was rolling his eyes. Like it was something it was just like an expression of like frustration. And he didn't realize that he was even doing that in the moment. And he said, well, why is that disrespectful? Why do you think it's disrespectful? It's just me moving my eyeballs in that way. And I didn't even know I was doing it. And so then you can begin to have that conversation. Again, it's going to be a little bit dependent upon like the age and what's age appropriate for the child. But I would make sure that especially as your kids are getting older, that you really establish like these are our family values, whether they're based in your family's religious identity, whether they're based in just something that you and your partner have discussed and decided this is the best path forward. This is what is important to us, whether it's based in just how you think people should interact with each other. I once heard somebody say that all of her parenting came down to 6 letters, and those letters were be kind. And I really empathize. I really, that really resonated with me too. It's obviously something that's stuck for the few years since I've heard it, but, making sure that like when you are communicating around like this, I need you to stop this behavior. It's because it goes against something that is a family value, and that it is a family expectation, and that your kids are really, really comfortable saying, well, this is the family expectation, and this is why we have that family expectation. And then if we want to start a new behavior, so if your child is having trouble getting up in the morning and you want them to be able to get up and, move through their morning by themselves, maybe they're a bit older and maybe they need to get themselves to the bus stop by themselves. So if you want your child to start a new behavior, here are three questions that I would ask myself. So what is the goal of what I am asking the child to do? Again, our own upbringing should not be the only goal. Again, it's going to guide what we do, especially as we reflect on whether that experience was, positive or negative for us, or whether it kind of consecrated our identity for who we are. But we really do want to reflect on what is the goal. So am I asking my child to get up an hour earlier because they, kind of move really slowly and they need to get to school by a certain time? Am I asking my child uh, to get dressed for soccer because it's important to me that they understand the value of being on time? Whatever it makes it much easier if you can communicate what the goal is behind that behavior, both to your child and for your own knowledge. Because if you can't figure out, what the goal of that thing that you're asking your child to do is, then it may not be, again, a battle that you want to fight in that moment. Um, and are there other ways for the child to meet that goal? So if you're asking your child to set an alarm in the morning, are there other ways? Would the child prefer that you wake them up in the morning and then they're able to, get up more easily and move through their day? Um, I'm sorry, I thought I heard somebody, but I think somebody just popped on. So are there other ways for that child to meet that goal, which I think is important as well? And then the last question is the child in a place in their brain where they're capable of meeting the goal at the moment? And I am so, so guilty of this, of asking my kids to do things when like they are already stressed or when they're in a moment of transition. And one thing I realized this year was, so my daughter is in first grade. Last year in kindergarten, she had homework, but the homework expectations for first grade have certainly scaled up a lot. And what I realized is right when she walks through the door, she wants to sit down and she wants to get her homework out of the way so she can sort of focus on the rest of her night. However, when she is in that moment of transition and she's transitioning from school to home, she's not always in the best mental space. And when we talk a lot about like where you're functioning from in your brain, in order to do that academic work, in order to be able to think, the most concretely, in order to be able to be capable of that critical thinking, you really need to be functioning from your cortex, from that top of part of your brain. And if you are stressed and you are in a moment of transition, or you are, struggling for whatever reason, you're going to be functioning from lower in your brain. So you may not be able to meet the expectation that's in front of you. So if I'm asking my child to, start a new behavior, I need you to go take a bath right now. I need you to go do your homework. I need you to do X, Y, or Z. Are they really capable of meeting that with where they're functioning from in their brain? And obviously you're not going to know, their neurobiology at every moment, but you can take kind of a rough temperature. Are they calm in the moment? Have they just gone through a major transition or even a minor transition in their day? Maybe they need some regulating activity before they're able to fully engage in that thing that's in front of them right now? And when we start to ask these questions, it really puts us in the position of thinking like about the demands that we're placing on our kids in that moment, whether it's, I need you to stop doing this thing, or I need you to start doing this thing, and really puts us in the position to be prepared with the why, and also helps us communicate more clearly around what the expectations are for our children. So when we're talking about, I always say that when I talk to teachers will really bring three behaviors of concern to me. They'll say that students are disrespectful, students are defiant, and students are disruptive. A lot of times we meet with parents, and usually we don't hear that disruptive because, it's not, home is typically not an environment where disruption is necessarily, I mean, it's not usually a behavior of concern in the home, but we do hear a lot about like defiance and disrespect, especially as kids get to like the upper elementary grades and get a little bit older. We do hear about these behaviors sometimes in younger kids, especially, and those kids are typically termed like strong-willed kids or, stubborn kids, but really it's all kind of the same thing that we're communicating about, regardless of the age. The behaviors may look a little bit different, but the core kind of needs behind those behaviors are really similar. So when we're thinking about, well, what is defiance? I tend to put it into 4 categories. So defiance can come from academic needs, and so sometimes when I have asked, my children to do their homework, or I've sat with them and had them, I've tried to have them read or do something that's related to school. They may not have had the ability to do that in the moment, but also didn't have like the requisite communication skills to communicate with me about, the thing that they were struggling to do in that moment. And when we think about academic needs, for me, I think about it a lot in terms of like how I'm supporting them with their homework and how I'm supporting them meet their needs as they're related to school. But academic needs aren't only in the school setting. And so sometimes when we're asking kids to do things at home, it may just be that they're not like developmentally at that level where they can like look at a whole room that's messy and say, I know exactly where those things go. I know how to put those things where they belong. I know how to, organize my time and structure my time so that I'm putting this away first, and then I'm cleaning that, and then I'm wiping that up. They might not have those skills, either because it's not developmentally appropriate for them, or maybe they do have some lagging skills in there. And I would kind of classify that as sort of a broad academic skill, whether it's related to academics or not. A better term for it might be like a cognitive skill at that point. Regulatory needs. So a lot of times when kids are dysregulated, again, whether it's moments of transition or it's when they're feeling stressed, when they haven't eaten enough, when they have social issues with their peers, when they maybe haven't maybe when they're too overloaded with activities, but they need more of that regulation. But instead of communicating, hey, I'm feeling really dysregulated. I need a day where we don't do activities. I need to go to bed earlier. My kids will never ask me to go to bed earlier. But sometimes that's exactly what they need. And so they have these regulatory needs. And the way that they're communicating them is sometimes being like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to get out of bed in the morning. I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do. And so they're communicating it in a way that feels a lot like defiance, but it's just because they may not have the skills to communicate, hey, I actually am feeling overwhelmed right now, and I need some additional regulation. It could also be about a sense of control. So for kids, particularly kids who feel like they don't have control in other areas of their life. So maybe they're in a really strict classroom and they're not used to that, or maybe they just, maybe maybe they're just at the age where they don't feel like they have a lot of control, which again happens a lot with like adolescence. It also actually happens during toddlerhood. But maybe they're feeling like they don't have a ton of control. And so their way to exert control is to say, like, you can't make me do this thing that I don't want to do in this moment. You can punish me, but you can't ultimately make me do this thing. And so that is them kind of exerting their need for a sense of control. And there are ways to really share with our children, share that sense of control, and be able to say, like, there's some kind of shared control here, or you're not going to have full control, but like, I will give you the option of A, B, or C, and you can kind of select between those options. And lastly, and this is the one that I think most parents say, like, oh, it's just they don't want to do the thing that they don't want to do. It's just a non-preferred activity. And I will say there are certainly cases, there are certainly kids, there are certainly moments where a kid just doesn't want to do the thing that they don't want to do, and so they just are defiant in those moments. But I would say, like, out of the situations that I have been both as a parent and going into schools, when we see defiance, a lot of times it's just that there's an unmet need somewhere. Again, whether it's academic, regulatory, just trying to regain control, there's some need that isn't being met for that individual kid in the moment. And it's usually not just that it's a non-preferred activity. So what is aggression? Well, again, I would argue that a lot of these behaviors are very similar in that they're usually, masking some underlying need that the individual has. So with aggression, it masks in other feelings. And or masks another feeling, or multiple feelings, I should say. So with aggression, sometimes with uh, kids that are female, sometimes we'll see more like relational aggression, more like, name calling, more verbal aggression. With boys, we can see more physical aggression. Again, that could be the reverse, could be true. We see boys with verbal aggression, we see girls with physical aggression. It's just, painting in broad strokes, that is more, it is more typical to see the reverse. And a lot of times it can be about, a feeling of self-efficacy. Do they feel themselves capable of doing the thing that you're asking them to do? Do they feel themselves capable of, meeting the expectations that are on them, whether explicit or implicit in the moment? It could also be, you could also see aggression from feeling ignored or invalidated. And so I was in a meeting about a kid today, and at a school, and they were talking about how, his parent worked night shift, and he, doesn't see her that often. And so when she comes to pick him up from school, sometimes he'll like grab a hold of her hair. And this is a very young child, but he'll grab a hold of her hair and like pull it to pull her down, and he like won't let go of it. So again, like that, if I were to just look at that from the outset and not know any of the situation, that very much looks just like aggression. That is, for all intents and purposes, like aggression, to grab somebody's hair, pull them, and then hold them into you while still holding onto their hair. But really, that's just about like, I feel disconnected from this person because I'm not seeing them very much, and I want to see them more. So it's really about like wanting that connection versus like wanting purely to be aggressive, which is, again, the minority of cases here. And then interpersonal issues, aggression a lot of times does come up, it comes up kid to kid. It comes up between siblings, it comes up between, parents and children. And a lot of times it is like, well, I felt, disrespected, or I felt hurt by what you did. And I, again, didn't have that knowledge of, the appropriate or socially appropriate ways to communicate around that. And so what we want to shift to think of is like, how can we support our kids develop the language around this? So when we meet with parents, a lot of times we hear, and the same thing for teachers too, but like, I would be able to help my kids if they would just tell me what they needed. Like if they would just tell me, I need help with my homework, I need more sleep, I am feeling frustrated at the moment, I am feeling sad, I am feeling angry. However, those are skills that are built by like very, very explicit practice. And we can't expect a kid really of any age to have that skill unless they've been explicitly taught how to do it, and they've had opportunities in a safe environment to practice that skill of communicating around what it is that they need in that moment. So I would be able to help my kids if they just tell me what they need, but do they have the ability to do that? And so for our younger kids, it's really easy for us to say, oh, well, they're 3 and they're still developing in their language, or they're 4 or they're 5 and they're still developing in their, their abilities to communicate. And then kids hit a certain age and we sort of lose that same level of empathy with our kids of being like, well, do they know how to communicate? But it's still, I'm sure all of you can think of examples of adults that you have met in situations where you've been like, I've met adults who don't know how to communicate around what they need, who might just, get upset, who might get escalated, who might, ignore people, who might block people out when they're upset, who have these, seemingly inappropriate reactions when they have these feelings that they don't know how to communicate about. And the same can be true for our kids. And that's something that really needs to be built over time with a whole lot of practice. And so when we're thinking of like, how do we support our kids when they're being, or if they are at times defiant, or if they are at times aggressive, or if they are at times disrespectful, well, we really need to support them in their communication and learning how to communicate when they have feelings, ideas, thoughts that maybe they don't know how to appropriately express, that are coming out as these, very big behaviors, but really there's an underlying need that isn't being effectively communicated in that moment. So when we want to teach our children this, it's really simple to have I mean, I say simple, but it's actually a very complicated, like, biological process. But like, we want our kids to be able to identify what they're feeling. So that's the first part. There's like emotional self-awareness. It's saying like, I feel angry, and this is what that feels like in my body, and this is what I emotionally feel when I feel angry. And that is a whole, you know, that is a whole skill unto itself to develop that communication around, you know, how to say, and again, just that identifying, like, I feel angry, and then being able to move from that. And this is a whole other second skill to saying, I need this. So not only do I feel angry, but I need a moment of silence. I need to walk away for a minute. I need space. I need a hug. I need to talk about it. I need you to hear me. I need you to just listen to me, rant, whatever it might be, to communicate around what that need is, to be able to say, first, I have that emotional awareness of being able to identify a feeling. And there's something that Daniel Siegel, who wrote the book The Whole Brain Child, he always says, like, name it to tame it. And there's research to support that when you name an emotion, you are better able to then manage the emotion. So again, that's that first part, that emotional self-awareness. And then below that is like, I need, and that's being able to identify how that person with you can best support you. And again, what that requires is more self-awareness to say, well, what helps me when I'm feeling angry is to listen to music, is to be alone, is to be with other people, is physical touch, like whatever that might be, to be able to identify what it is that supports you when you're feeling that identified feeling. And then that third thing is to be able to ask for that thing that you need. And so again, going back to that last thing, I would be able to help my kids if they would just tell me what they need in that moment. And these are the component skills that they would need to be able to do that. And so when we're thinking of like, oh, my kid is being defiant, my kid is being disrespectful, my kid is being aggressive in the moment, we really need to think of, how can I build up these skills so that then they're able to communicate what they're feeling, what they need, and what would help them in this moment. And this is something that I usually provide for teachers, but could also be helpful at home. So saying like, I noticed that you were sitting with your head down, that I asked you to brush your teeth and you delayed brushing your teeth, that you were moving around our home, that you were running outside when you weren't supposed to be, that you were sort of distracted when I was talking to you, whatever it might be. I noticed that you were, doing this thing, and ask them how they're feeling. So sometimes kids, and again, this would be, age appropriate for them in that moment, but it would be really beneficial for you to do this in a situation where, like, maybe your kid doesn't want to talk to you in the moment, maybe they're not able to, but maybe you just put this in front of them, let them work on it independently, come back to them later, like, hey, do you want to talk about this? If no, they could just hand it back to you. This is something you could do. But if doesn't feel like it fits kind of with your communication style or the communication style you have in your family, you could just ask these questions. Hey, I noticed that when you came home, you seemed a little sad today. How are you feeling? And then if we're like, I don't know, are you feeling tired? Are you feeling frustrated, bored? Do you want to talk about it later, maybe? Or maybe you don't know how you're feeling. And sometimes the answer is like, I don't really know how I'm feeling at the moment. And then, like, do you need support? Yes, no, or maybe, but you're not really sure. And then you could ask them, do you want a hug in the moment? Do you want to, listen to music together? Do you want me to leave you alone for a little bit? Like, what do you need in this moment? And a lot of times that structure in and of itself, of you noticing something before like a behavior occurs, can stop that like defiant, disrespectful, aggressive behavior before it even becomes part of the conversation. So when you are responding to defiance at home, always prioritize regulation. So we always say the 3 R's, and this is from Dr. Bruce Perry, but like regulate, relate, reason. So that the bottom part of our brains is responsible for our sensory and emotional regulation. Then we have our relate, so making connections with other people, and then the top of our brains is that like reasoning with others, doing a lot of that you know that academic work that we have. That's the top part of our brain. That's the reason part of our brain. And often when we're talking to kids, after they've been, disrespectful, we start from that top of the brain. We start with like, what you did was disrespectful. That's not appropriate in this family. That's not the expectation we have for you. We're not going to accept that behavior moving forward. A lot of times we communicate at that reason level, but we need to start from the bottom of the brain and work up. Do something regulating, connect with the child, it doesn't have to be, this, let's, walk around and hold hands for 5 minutes. It could be something as simple as just like, a positive comment, something like, hey, can you sit with me for a minute? Something to show that you're connected in that moment. And then finally, when you get to the top of the brain, that's that reasoning part. And so you always want to prioritize regulation. If you're noticing that your kid is getting dysregulated all of the time, that they're being defiant a lot, add in some regulation. What that might look like is, doing some mindfulness together, making sure that there are opportunities for movement, making sure that your child has a snack at regular intervals if being hungry is something that tends to dysregulate them. Make sure you have opportunities that are kind of built into the day for that kid to regulate, for them to calm down, for them to come back to baseline. And that should be the number one priority, both before these things occur. If you're noticing that like there's a lot of disrespect or there's a lot of defiance, if you're noticing those things, you want to make sure that you are prioritizing that regulation first. And then specific praise, make sure that once you start to see positive changes, that you're calling it out. So if you feel like your child is being disrespectful, make sure that in moments where they are being respectful, that you're specifically saying, not just, hey, that was respectful, I appreciate it, but that you're calling out the specific thing that they did that was respectful. Hey, you noticed that I was feeling tired and you came and laid a blanket over me. That felt really respectful in the moment. That felt really kind. Or, you dropped something on the floor and you actually picked it up and I didn't even have to ask you. Thank you for respecting our home, for respecting like the cleanliness of the space. When you are able to give that specific praise, it communicates the opposite of like what you're trying to, or it communicates the positive to what you're trying to stop them from doing. So if you're struggling with a kid who's defiant, every time they follow directions, call that out. Make sure you're providing that specific praise. If you're struggling with a child who's aggressive, every time they're kind or they identify an emotion or they are, able to, you could tell that they're utilizing self-control in the moment. Make sure you just as well call that out and say, I see what you're doing in the moment. I really, really appreciate that you are being so thoughtful about this now. Differentiate expectations based on development. So it can be really hard, and I'm definitely guilty of this with our oldest child who's 8. I have 3 younger children, so of course my expectations for him are higher, but sometimes I have to remind myself he's still just 8 years old. He's still in 3rd grade. And so we have to make sure that our expectations are appropriate for the stage that our kid is in at that point and where they are developmentally, not where we expect them to be developmentally. So if you have a child who is, speech delayed and they are, 3 years old, well, maybe we don't hold them to the same expectations that we would hold for a kid who's 3 but is highly verbal. It depends where your kid is developmentally, where they are, what they're experiencing, and again, where they're functioning from in their brain. So if you have, a 15-year-old that comes home and they've just had a horrible day, maybe the expectations that day are a little bit different for them because you recognize, well, right now they're not functioning at their best. Right now, they're not going to have the ability to do what they would on a really good day. And I want to recognize that not only where they are developmentally, but also sort of where they are in their brain at this moment. Be really, really aware, especially as kids get older, of like tone, positioning, power dynamics. If you are, tall, be aware of like looking down at your kid when you're providing directions. Be aware of like, getting down to their level, communicating with them eye to eye. Be aware of your tone. This is something that I talk about a lot with like particularly male teachers, sometimes they're misperceived just based on like how deep their tone is. Sometimes people will be like they're being sarcastic if they're monotonous. How make sure you are sort of aware, and not that you can modulate it in every moment, but be aware of like maybe how you're being perceived, and be really clear. Like if somebody's like, if your kid is like, you were being sarcastic with me in that moment, be like, I didn't mean to be sarcastic with you in that moment. That's not what I meant. I was feeling this way, or I was trying to communicate this. And just be aware that like in every moment, you may not be perceived the way that you want to be perceived, and be just kind of aware of the fact that like there's always a power dynamic between like a parent and a child, or there often is a power dynamic between a parent and a child. Just, and also, be aware of like your tone and your positioning, and like where you how you occupy the physical space that you're in with your child. And then also give children processing time and physical space. And so we want to make sure that like when we're asking something of our kid, when we're saying, hey, can you go brush your teeth? That we're not then like hovering over them to watch that they do it immediately in that moment. Because number one, that's like imposing. Number two, again, that shows like that power dynamic there. And then three, that also sort of gets you in the position of like, you're then going to be like watching over them in a way that shows that you don't really trust that your child will do that. So take a step away, go do something else, give them the time to both process that request and the space to do that thing that you're asking them to do in the moment. A lot of times, if you trust that your kids will do something, they will generally, not always, rise to the expectation and do the thing. But you need to give kids time and space to process it, especially as they get older, especially as we get into adolescence. And a lot of times we respond to defiance, disrespect, disruption, aggression in less than an ideal way because we are feeling triggered by the behavior at the moment. So we are feeling like, I felt disrespected by, my son rolling his eyes at me, and I got really triggered by that situation. And then I kind of snapped at him. And so we have to sort of remember, like, how are we going to manage our own feelings in the moment? How are we going to manage and make sure that we are regulated enough to respond to the underlying need and not just respond to the behavior at its face value? And so it's really important that like when we're thinking about how we want to respond to our kids, we're not just saying they're being disrespectful and I'm going to show them what disrespect is, or I'm going to, show them, how they should treat people, like whatever it might be. And again, there's sort of that like natural response of like self-protective, or maybe it's triggering for you that you want to respond, and you want to have like a show of power. And of course we all want our kids to be, not defiant all the time, and we want them to be respectful, and we want them to be kind, and we want them to, always speak to us in like this ideal way. But that's not reality. And especially since like they're still growing and developing, we need to allow space for them to do that and still be like, the kind, compassionate, best versions of ourselves when that's possible. So we need to know, like, if we're feeling triggered, or we're feeling upset, or we're feeling, that their behavior is less than ideal, that we know like when we need to step away from the situation, when we need time and space, so that we can then come back. And that also models for them what we want them to do in a situation where they're feeling disrespected or they're feeling upset by the situation. So it serves two purposes. It allows us to be co-regulating for our kids, and it also provides a good model for what we would want them to do in situations where they were feeling disrespected. So some very, very quick scenarios, and I want to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions if there are any, so I won't go through all of these. But imagine that you are the parent of a third grader. You pick up your third grade son from school. He barely mutters hello to you. When he gets home, he throws his bag on the floor. You remind him that the expectation is that he should hang his bag on the hook and take out his lunch bag. He says that if you want that done, you should do it yourself. So in that moment, of course, my immediate response is to feel like that's really disrespectful to say that. He knows what the expectation is. And it may be an immediate response based on like how you're raised. Like, I'm going to raise my voice at him. I'm going to, remind him of what the expectation is. But if you take a pause and you take a moment to realize, there was clearly something going on when you picked him up from school. He didn't say hello to you. He seemed a little bit off. he threw his bag, which is unusual, he didn't meet the expectation, and he snapped at you, maybe it's worth approaching the situation with curiosity. You seem off right now. You can acknowledge that the behavior that you just showed was disrespectful, but you also seem off and I'm a little bit worried about you. Or is everything okay? Is there something you want to talk about? Or sense that you're off right now, I do want to talk about that behavior that you just showed later, but right now I need you to take a beat. I need you to take a break in this moment. We'll come back to this later. And again, there is time and opportunity and space to communicate that behavior is unacceptable. Here's the expectation. You can meet that expectation, but it's not always in that moment that you need to do that. Again, there were many clues in this scenario that that kid wasn't feeling himself before he said that thing to you that kind of upset you. Before he was disrespectful, there were many clues that something else had potentially happened or he was feeling off. And it could be something as simple as like, I'm tired, or it was a long day, or my teacher took away recess, whatever it might be. And we just want to make sure that we're like approaching the situation with curiosity and saying, how did you feel in that moment? Instead of approaching the situation and being like, you were disrespectful in this moment. I need you to stop this behavior before you move forward, kind of in that approach. So the next scenario, you are a parent of a 10th grade daughter. Your daughter wakes up late on a Saturday morning after attending a school event on Friday night. She seems fine when she wakes up and gets progressively more irritable as the day goes on. Her younger sibling comes into a room and she pushes them out of the room and slams the door. So again, many things can be happening here. She seemed fine when she woke up. She got more irritable. Could be that she's tired. It could be she was, out on Friday night. She may have been out later than usual. It may have been a longer day. She may just be tired. She shouldn't have pushed her sibling. She shouldn't have slammed the door. She shouldn't have been irritable with people. In this moment, I would probably say I'm going to give her space. And then I'm going to try to help regulate her so that I can get to that point where we can relate. And then maybe we can reason and have a conversation about how to approach the situation differently. But your first goal in this moment should be, how can I support my daughter in regulation so that then I can have that conversation about her behavior? Because if she's not regulated, that conversation is not going to happen in the way that's going to best support your child. So some of the big picture things before I end. So I am of the belief that kids do well if they can. Not kids do well if they want to. All kids want to do well. And if kid isn't doing well, it's probably that they're lacking some kind of skill, whether that's around communication or, around understanding or just sort of around development. And if our lens reflects that, then we switch to a position of support. We start to approach it with curiosity. We start to say, how can I support my kid in this moment? What can I do to provide them with the skills that they need to be able to do as well as they want to do? If a child is being defiant, disrespectful, disruptive, aggressive, then they likely have an unmet need, not 100% of the time, but very close to 100% of the time. And our goal is to say, well, how can I meet the need? How can I support regulation of my child? Our long-term goal is to enable them and empower our children to communicate that need, to say, I am feeling X in the moment. I would love to develop, or what I need is this support right now. And this is what I'm asking of you in this moment in order to be able to help me meet that need. Our kids are not there. Again, a lot of adults aren't there either. And so our immediate goal is to help support our kids meet that need and regulate. And then our long-term goal is to develop and build those skills so that they're able to more effectively communicate that skill. So if you want to reach out to me, you can reach out on any of our social media platforms. Please feel free to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are most active on Instagram. You can also go to our website, and my email is here. I would love to answer any questions you have. And I'll take a look at the chat now. Amber, I think that question's for you.
Yes, Elisa, if you want to put your email address in the chat, I will email you a certificate tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Or I actually, I can send you, or yeah, that would be great. If you just want to put it in there, I'll send you an email tomorrow.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And if any of you have any additional questions or you want to reach out, feel free to reach out to me personally.